You're listening to Second Cut. This is the weekly podcast from thefilmmagazine.com where we explore topics in film theory, criticism. I should probably add history to this intro, through film reviews and good discussion. I'm Jacob, and I'm the one who is, completely rewriting the intro on the fly these days.
I'm Sam, and I'm the one who wishes we'd made intertitles for this particular episode, but, too much effort.
Sam, do you have a good old-timey voice?
I do not.
I'm Karen, and I'm the one with the intertitles. Dun, 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 dun. John T.
You sound like a South Park Canadian.
I tell you what, anyone that's listening to that back on the audio is having no idea what's happening just now. But
yeah,
I would have made intertitles.
Hey, you know what? That's why you should watch our live show. We do fun visual gags, and you can look at our mugs. We're beautiful.
I don't have mugs, but I do have Film Magazine water bottles instead for this one.
There you go. Joe copped a new sticker on his laptop, so
yeah,
it's the holiday season. Get people our Redbubble TFM merch.
Yeah, get the plug out of the way early.
I'm actually wearing a new one this week.
Life finds a way. There we go. We'll get the plugs in early. We can move on with our life now.
There we go.
Hey, but really, support the film magazine. Our editor Joe, he works very hard.
Yeah. And it's nearly Christmas. Get in your kind of charitable kind of frame of mind.
Exactly.
It's the season of giving and all that.
we want to keep the film magazine online, and we're independent publishers, and can always use the help. So.
Yep.
Yes.
Because it's nearly Christmas, we're doing nothing to do with Christmas this episode.
Yeah. I didn't calculate that this would almost... when it releases, it'll be in December as audio.
Yeah. I mean, depending on where you're listening from, if you're in Australia right now, it is December for you. So...
All right, guys. So today we are talking about silent movies. And how do you guys, just in general, feel about watching silent movies? Because I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan usually.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of leads into my question. I was going to ask you guys, along the same lines, do you find them more difficult to watch, or do you have to watch them in a different way to like a synchronized sound film? It's definitely a different experience for me. I feel like they require more attention, more kind of intense concentration. I think you're just so used to taking advantage just letting kind of something wash over you, and it's quite hard to get drawn into a silent film for me. I do feel that sounds like I'm doing homework.
Yeah, I think the trouble with us is we're so used now to everything being with synchronized sound. The idea that there isn't, after about 5 minutes, we just kind of go, okay, check the phone now. I mean, I do this with movies anyway, but with silent, it's harder because you don't kind of have the dialogue going. You don't have the synchronized sound, obviously. And I think for a lot of it, until you get to sort of the 20s when you have the proper kind of silent features coming in, a lot of kind of the timing of the shots. I'll be talking about Melies in a minute. A lot of his stuff, quite often it be sort of a minute and a half held on a particular shot. So it just, after sort of 10, 20 seconds, you're going, we get the point, move on. And so it's easier to drift off.
They were still like borrowing very heavily from the stage, like the film grammar and language hadn't evolved at that point. It's literally, well, people used to watch something on stage will just have the camera just sit there like they're sitting down and watching a show,
Although I will, going into Melies, although going into it a little bit more, I will be mentioning the fact that it wasn't all completely static, and there was some movement, but movement really kicks off in sort of like the early 20s, then properly in the 30s. It's just harder to mount it on stuff to move it around.
Yeah, the only time I'm really engaged with it is when it's visually cutting edge, the more avant-garde stuff. and like German expressionism. I can watch like a full movie because there's a good story with it too. So it's got to be good drama, good visuals. I can really get in on it. But if I'm just watching like Hollywood commercial film from the 1910s, it's
I mean, just checking back through my 2023 watch list to see what silent stuff I'd watched, because for this year I kept kind of highlighting a couple of different categories for stuff to make sure I'm not just watching black and white horror movies from the 40s for the entirety of like my 100 films. I watched Man with a Movie Camera for the first time in from 1929, right at the beginning of the year.
Too,
then I watched a couple of Buster Keaton shorts. Frozen North, Convict 13, Recreation, I think, is that Chaplin, from 1914. And then I watched Sunrise for some film studies tutoring that I'm doing at the moment, just starting. And then until like prepped for this podcast, I'd watched nothing else. So that's 2 silent features and a couple of shorts in 11 months, which, considering the kind of silent era, if you want to call it that, is 32 years long if we go up to 1927, even though they're still making silence after them.
Yeah.
That's astonishingly bad, you know?
Yeah.
It's quite depressing.
Yeah, I mean, this year I also watched Man with Movie Camera for the first time. I watched a couple of Melies for the first time. I watched, again, a couple of Keatons, a fair few Chaplins, and a lot of Mabel Normand shorts. Even before we started doing this episode, I read a piece in Empire a few months back that was kind of highlighting a kind of basically just said they're all on YouTube. Just go watch them on YouTube. So I did. So I've seen about 10 or 15 of them this year. I also watched Pandora's Box of the year, which was from 1929, German kind of melodrama, which was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's not generally one you choose to kind of put on, except for like some kind of notable genre exceptions. You know, like I love like Nosferatu, Dr. Caligari, and even the original Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Operas, made by Universal. They're great. But generally speaking, I have to kind of be watched for a reason, or set aside a bit of time, to say, right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to concentrate on this, I'm going to appreciate it, and I'm going to have a new kind of understanding of this period of cinema.
Yeah, and for me, pretty much I watched what I watched in school, so a lot of early shorts. I watched a few, like 20s impressionistic films from Europe, Soviet montage stuff, some really interesting shorts actually. This one about like a chess tournament or something, which is like a really early use of like editing in a short film that way, at least in Russia. There's all kinds of really cool things from that era that I still need to see. But yeah, I mean, I saw Birth of a Nation, which I skipped a lot of, because really like the bit that we really think about these days is the second half with all of the, overt racism. And I don't care so much about the battles. And then, stuff that I've just wanted to watch for fun, like the expressionist films, Nosferatu,
Metropolis.
Yeah, and oh gosh, what's the one I wrote about in my top 10? Joan of Arc, Passion of Joan of Arc.
So even I'll say something like The Jazz Singer, which is the film that introduced synchronized sound. Most of that is silent. There's a couple of like interspersed bits of synchronized sound, but for the most part, I think from what I remember, I think it still has intertitles as well. For a lot of it, because
it's built to that that reveal at the end, isn't it? Like that, it's people going in for that experience, that scene. It's like when kind of synchronized sound kind of drops in. I mean, that's almost like what the artist was kind of like referring to. When all of a sudden it's the Titanic shift when that changes, when the whole language of the film world changes.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember as well that it took a couple of years for cinemas and the Nickelodeons across the world to actually have the technology installed into the buildings to be able to play the synchronized sound. So, it took a long while for that to come in. Britain only got its first synchronized sound film 2 years after, Blackmail, and there are 2 versions of Blackmail. He filmed it in silent, and then he got asked to make it into sound. So he put a couple of them to change it to sound. So you get 2 different versions. Some of the scenes are very slightly different with different techniques depending on which version you're watching. So it took, and it was kind of Warner Brothers that got it in, but then I think Paramount and other companies were trying to make their own system. So it took until about 31 for everyone to be completely converted.
Yeah, I mean, Chaplin ends up redoing like a lot of his kind of his short films, some of his features actually, his 20s ones, just to again add like a synchronized track to go with them. I mean, I'd never seen the Gold Rush before this year, all the way through, but the version I watched on my DVD was the version with the added kind of synchronized I think it still didn't have dialogue, and it still had the intertitles, but like the synchronized sound effects and music and stuff. So they got back in and timed that, and it was a different experience. It was like a bit like with Modern Times. It was like one foot in like both kind of eras. It's not quite a talkie yet, but it's definitely not a silent film either. It's like somewhere in between.
It's like, it's interesting when people go, "Oh, what was the first sort of Mickey Mouse short?" and everyone goes, "Steamboat Willie," and you go, "Well, no, that was the first one that was released. They had 2 before that. You had Plain Crazy and is it the Grouch and Gruffalo or something along those lines that they tried to get put out there and didn't take off. And it's when they managed to get Steamboat Willie with the synchronized sound, that was the first one released. Therefore, there's kind of 2 answers, and I will always say Plain Crazy.
And, talking about how wide the era is for it being, 32 years, it's the whole growth of the medium, making it a different visual language than just theater. And, we go from, Kieran, you're going to talk about the microfilms and the short films, and it gets to Napoleon being shown on 3 giant cinema screens.
Yeah.
And, that is such crazy evolution. And I mean, moving into the sound era, it completely changed film, but so much of the film grammar that we still see today, all of its roots are there, and that aspect of it is cool to see. And another archaic, relic of the silent film era, the Oscars, at least in the 50s, I don't know when they stopped it, had short film 1 reel and 2 reel nominations and winners. So that's pretty interesting. That,
and of course, Wings, which was the first Best Picture winner, is the only Best Picture winner which is silent, because that came out in 2008 and won at the 2009 Oscars, I think it was, because it's obviously the year after, or it's the year back. Then the next one was a talkie. So there's been 1 Best Picture winner which is silent, and it's not bad. I think I've got a review of that on the Film Magazine somewhere. Go watch it.
I mean, I think All Quiet on the Western Front, which obviously followed that, was originally slated to be another silent film, but they kind of rejigged it midway through, I think, because this whole talkie thing kind of came about, and thought, oh, this will make it even more epic, more tragic and affecting,
Yeah. Oh, and Wings was 27, and
then 28 Oscars.
And oh gosh, where was it? Napoleon has, Wings has the cool shot through the crowd. Napoleon has a lot of that same stuff in the same release year. So that's the other fun part, is seeing all the independent minds who are like, I came up with this, and I also came up with this. And studying silent film, I think, is more fun for me than actually really watching the movies a lot of the time.
Yeah, it is a history lesson, and you also kind of, we then have the question, which I'm going to pose to everyone, because everyone's going to have different answers, depends which theorist you speak to, of who invented cinema. And you go, all right, there's about 5 different possible answers for this, depending on kind of how you're going to skew it.
Because I'm from Yorkshire, I'm obviously going to back the guys who did the famous film going over that bridge in Leeds, just within months of like the Lumiere brothers.
Because you got him, you've got Louis Le Prince as well, who was a Belgian inventor. And I need to double check the actual dates. He was a Belgian inventor who created a device which was very similar to what the Lumiere brothers would premiere in 1895. And he'd kind of half developed it, and he was, I think, on his way to Paris. He was on his way, planning a trip to the United States. He decided to return to France to visit his brother in Dijon. On the 16th of September, he took a train to Paris, but having taken a later train than planned, his friends missed him in Paris. He was never seen again by his family or friends. So somebody that could have got like the proper premiere of something similar to what we now kind of use as this the kinematograph, which the Lumiere brothers would kind of show off in 1895, vanished.
That would be a great kind of like only slightly stranger than the fiction kind of murder mystery film, wouldn't it?
To be honest,
like the guy who might have invented cinema just mysteriously missing. And
to be honest, if one day I get the chance to write a Doctor Who episode, that's what it's going to be on. It will be on it'll be either Louis Le Prince or Who Killed Poe. But that's a really interesting one. There are other answers, obviously. Edward Muybridge, who anyone that's seen Nope, that's how Jordan Peele starts his thing off with Edward Muybridge.
Kieran, can I throw in the magic lanterns, which were invented in the 17th century?
Yeah, you've got the magic lanterns. You've got the zoetrope. Edison had a kinetoscope as well, but it was kind of the same principles what the Lumiere brothers would have, but it was kind of almost like a one-person showing, so it wasn't really a projection onto the screen. Muybridge's thing, he got like 12 cameras in a row and put them all on like string triggers and then rode a horse through it, so they like that, and then you put the pictures together in a flip book. That's how they worked out actually how horses run. That they go on to 1 foot and all four are moving independently. Beforehand, they thought they moved like dogs, sort of 2 feet at a time. And then actually in this book here, which a lot of my research for this came from Georges Méliès by Elizabeth Ezra, came out, I don't know, 2000, so it wasn't that long ago, but academia terms is ancient. Also pointed out that although the Lumiere brothers weren't the first to kind of show it, even though it was kind of well known. There was a man called Max Skladanowski, I think it is, I'm going to butcher the name, who had exhibited his bioscope in Berlin in early November of the same year. And apparently in certain places, I think like Belgium, I think it is a certain European country, cinema is kind of still known as bioscope after that. So, you know, you've got all these things, but realistically, it's Lumiere, the Lumiere brothers, which kind of get the deal, even though there were lots of people working on stuff around that time and lots of inventions that kind of get passed over. But we normally credit it to the Lumiere brothers because they were the ones that kind of showed it, and everyone went, "Oh my gosh, this is the thing that did it. This was the kind of that assembled all the kind of. They're the ones that kind of got the one that worked, essentially. Hit the nail on the head."
Yes.
Da-da-da-da. The invention of cinema. Unfortunately for us, realistically, the French got it. The Brits are very upset.
So, Kieran, for anyone who's not seen Martin Scorsese's Hugo, who what?
Oh, such a depressing movie.
Yeah.
Kind of. I'll admit, I watched Hugo in first year at university because straight after it, guess what we did? Trip to the moon. Strange that. There we go, so Georges Méliès, who is the person that I'm doing, it sounds so much better when you say his name in a slightly butchered French accent.
In an outrageous French accent.
Yes. Why do you think I have an outrageous accent? So he was born on the 8th of December 1861 in Paris and would die in Paris as well in 38. He was the son of I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. He was the son of a man who'd got a kind of shoemaking empire. So he was fairly well off by the time he got to school age. Went through a number of schools, got his baccalaureate in 1880. He had a year or two military service, worked in his father's factory for a while. And then kind of in the 1880s, he went to London for a bit. And this is an interesting part because he gets taken under the wing. When he was there, he obviously didn't speak a lot of English. So when he was going to the music hall things, it was kind of the magic rather than kind of the theatre that took his attention because it was more visual and didn't need as much of the language. And he gets taken under the wing of a magician called John Neville. I think that's masculine.
Rarely a good sign when you're taken in by a magician.
Yeah, and he kind of got attracted to magic from then. He'd always been apparently like doodling puppets and stuff on his notebooks in school. But this is the point where he really found it and wanted to go into it. And then he moved back to Paris to work in his family's shoe factory and started to go to the Theatre Robert Houdin, which is interesting because that theatre is where Harry Houdini gets his stage name from. So there's an interesting kind of magic connection there. In 1888, his father dies and the company gets divvied up between the sons, and Melies gives his portion away to buy the theatre. He's essentially a magician for a good portion of his life, stage magician, running these shows. I guess it'll be a bit of music hall tradition as well. And he inherits essentially the kind of creative minds, magicians behind it, the consultants. And he actually, whose name I don't have, essentially almost inherits somebody who would work with him on a lot of his films and then eventually be his second wife. I will get the name. So he's working at a music hall, doing as a magician in this grand theatre in Paris for a lot. And then on the 28th of December in 1895, he sees the Lumière invention, the kinematograph. And he immediately goes, I need that. This is where it is. This is what we can do. This is the future. And apparently he offers the Lumière brothers 10,000 francs for this machine.
How much is that in 2023 money?
Haven't got a clue, but probably quite a bit. But the Lumière brothers actually saying no, and there's loads of funny anecdotes. You go back to the beginning of cinema about discussions now. They didn't sell it off because the Lumière brothers' dad reckoned it was just a passing fad and wouldn't last for very long, so wanted to keep it for themselves to make as much money out of it as possible before everyone's interest in it goes away. So the father of the inventors of cinema essentially thought that after a couple of months, cinema was dead. Make of that what you will in today's world.
Hey, yeah, I was going to say, Kieran, are you saying that cinema was the TikTok of the 1890s and that in the near future or in the far future, TikTok will be the primary form of narrative media consumption?
Yeah. So
Perfect.
Essentially, the father of the guys that created this, the year after it was invented, reckoned that cinema would be dying. So all these arguments that everyone has are not new. Anyway, Melies goes, I can't have that. I'll go to somebody else. And got hold of one in London, I think it was, or a similar kind of machine. Rejigged it around, made some improvements on it.
My notes say it was a machine by R.W. Paul.
Very possibly.
I don't know who that is.
I think it was somebody that was showing or exhibiting these films in London and places like that, which is also quite funny because obviously, therefore, right at the start, where is cinema shown? It's shown in fairgrounds. It is a fairground attraction initially. So, which always makes me laugh about Scorsese's comment that superhero movies are just fun fair attractions. It's like, where did this start? Strange this. All these things are hilarious. So he gets this camera, and then one of the other things I didn't realize, Méliès' first film that he ever makes is a film called Une Partie de Cartes, which is pretty much an exact remake of the Lumière brothers' Partie de Cartes from the year before. So this whole thing about Hollywood's got no good ideas anymore, make something new. Not even a year had gone by in cinema's history, and we were doing remakes.
Yeah.
It doesn't even take 12 months, and we've got remakes going. So that's just, I hadn't realized that was a thing, and I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? This is hilarious. In 1896, he starts building his studio the Star Film Studio that would be made and completed the following year. And once he gets to that, most of his films would be shot in this studio, and it was all massive glass to keep the light, because light was at a premium back then. So you're using as much sunlight as you physically possibly can for the exposure. Apparently, Edison, for his early films, had essentially a massive stage on a turntable, so he could follow the sun around and keep it all in the sun as well. When he gets into there, most of his stuff is on stage. But the interesting thing is that Méliès is one of, I mean, I think this is the second movie production location in the world. It's the first or second, and it's one of the first or second movie production companies in the world ever. So he really is a trailblazer. And when we were talking about earlier about the moving camera, one of the things I hadn't actually because everyone, when we think of Méliès, we think of kind of essentially filmed stage plays. Essentially, this is what he becomes known for. It starts off essentially filming his magic tricks and working on from there. But in 1896, he does a film, which I'm going to get the name of again, which I have seen. Panorama Prix d'une train en marche. Panorama on top of a train, where he literally just mounts a camera on top of a train and sets it going. So we've got essentially a moving camera in 1896. And this is pretty much exactly the same thing that Edwin Porter would use in The Great Train Robbery in 1903. There's a shot there as part of the robbery. People are essentially taking over the train, and it's mounted on top of a moving train as they're doing it. And you go, this is exactly the same shot, pretty much. They're just adding more action in. He's doing these kind of narrative films, these trick films, as he calls it. Apparently, he found this by he was just filming outside and the camera jammed. And when he started again, a bus had turned into a hearse or something along those lines. It's debated whether this is actually the case, because you can do similar things with Magic Lantern. So shows kind of where you put the slides.
In my note, I have it was a woman that was there. She moved, and then a man was there when recording resumed.
Yeah, there's that. There's a bus into a hearse as well. I think there's multiple things, but again, apparently scholars are still debating whether this is actually true. It actually happened. It's a good story either way.
I love that back whenever we had cool like camcorders, it was really easy to do those tricks.
Yeah,
and like
you just stop, you put somebody else in and go.
This was all so advanced for the time, and now it's like kids can figure it out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is man, because again, you have to remember, like, most of the public haven't seen film. You know, it takes years for them to like take the equipment around to show them. So for people, if you're in even rural areas in kind of 1897, 1898, 1899, it is very rare to see moving films. You may never seen one before in your life. You're in your 20s, 30s. And in today's world, that is impossible. It's unimaginable. I don't think we can quite get our heads around how revolutionary just the concept of moving images was. So this is all interesting. And he's not only doing these kind of trick films or feature films, he's doing advertisements for whiskey companies, for hat companies. He's doing and they would project them on the side of walls. You know, he's doing stuff for the Lumiere brothers. Sometimes they would hire him out. And one of the other things he did was essentially recreations of not only historical events but news events. So if you'd only read something in the papers, obviously we don't have news footage yet. This comes in kind of the next 10, 15 years. I think Pathé starts doing versions of it. So he essentially recreates news events. And he does a 10-part series on
like dramatizations, like on crime shows.
Yeah. So the Dreyfus Affair is a series of 1-minute shorts of this kind of scandal that was on in the news at the time. I can't remember exact details of it that was going on. He was essentially dramatizing those. He dramatized what's it called? Divers at Work on the Wreck of the Maine, which is a ship that sank. And there's a 1-minute film of essentially divers going down to examine the wreck, and they find a corpse and take it up to the surface, which is a dummy. And that one's interesting because it's the first time he goes and puts a fish tank in the way of the camera. So you've got fish actually swimming around, and then you've got people acting behind it. So you've got the illusion of it being underwater. So you have lots of interesting things that are actually, he's experimenting with. And bearing in mind, again, this is, in the 2 or 3 years after film has been invented completely. This is revolutionary ideas. And when you watch it now, you go, really? This is revolutionary? And you have to understand the technology's only been around for a couple of years. Like, cinema is not cinema yet. It's not a thing. This is them testing the stuff out. So he's doing all this stuff, and then we get to what he's known for, which is a trip to the moon. And it's the famous image, again, of this book with the moon going into the eye, which I believe we sell stickers of at the Film Magazine store. We do. I obviously need to get one. So if you want to get a rocket going into the eye of the moon, then go there.
Yay, domaine public is how I'm assuming you say that in French.
What he said. So it's kind of a riff on a couple of novels, Jules Verne, Journey to the Moon and then Around the Moon, I think it is, or From the Earth to the Moon, then Around the Moon is the sequel. And also H.G. Wells, a couple of years before, had released First Men on the Moon, which is a very fun read about these people that go to the moon, and there's loads of wild flowers there on the dark side of the moon. They meet the Cellulites, the moon people, and they have attacks and wars and stuff like that. And so he goes and creates this dramatization. It's about 12 minutes long. It's public domain. Go watch it. There are various different soundtrack versions. There's a colored version, because color was a thing. Again, we forget. Color was a thing from 1896. You just hand painted all the frames, and Georges Méliès had a whole team of women doing that, almost like a production line of them hand painting these films. But Trip to the Moon is story about a guy, kind of a wizard almost, that has a conference. He goes, I'm going to build a cannon that's going to fire us in like a bullet to the moon. And then you go and see it being built, and they all get loaded in, and they set off like a cannon, and it fires them out into the moon. And then that's the rocket kind of going into the moon's eye, which is an anthropomorphized kind of moon with the face. And they all land, and they get out, and they have a few adventures, and they meet this crustacean selenite, which is a guy in a costume, obviously. And they get captured for a bit, and then they escape. And the wizard has this umbrella, I think it is, and he whacks them with it, and they turn into a poof of like blue and red smoke on occasion. Using a variety of magic tricks and stages, and trap doors, and stopping and starting stuff. And they run away, and they get back into their rocket, and they plunge off a cliff and fall by gravity, obviously, all the way back to Earth, and land in the sea, and they get rescued, and they've accidentally brought one of the Sunlights with them, but they capture it, and there's a big celebration at the palace. And there's more stuff interesting that I kind of hadn't thought about until I read this book, and that's why you check these books out, because they have interesting takes on stuff. And a couple of things. One, the whole thing of the rocket going into the moon. There's a couple of things. One, the moon comes closer to you. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, they haven't kind of massively invented how to move cameras. Yeah, you can strap it to something like a train.
Put it on it, yeah.
But in a movie studio, that's quite hard to do. You don't have a train. You've just got a stage. So what they did is they essentially blacked everything out and put it on a black kind of wall and put that on rails, and then moved the entire thing closer to the camera instead. And he did this, I think, the year before in a film which I don't have the name of, or I do, but I can't remember which one it is.
Gance for that used tricycles, at least in Napoleon.
L'homme à la tête caoutchouc. I'm going to find the actual English version, where Méliès essentially got a different version of his head and made the head a lot bigger by a massive pair of bellows, and blows his head up, and then he kind of makes it shrink. So he's using the same technique there, which is kind of the equivalent of almost like a close-up, because we haven't really invented close-ups yet. This isn't a thing. It's all shot in mid pretty much. The language has yet to be invented, and Méliès has to invent it as well. Not only that, one of the other things that Elizabeth Ezra points out in this book is that the rocket technically lands on the moon twice. You have it going into the eye, and then there's another shot of the moon landing. It's like from two different angles. This is a fairly modern technique. This is something that John Woo does. This is one of his trademarks. You'll have an explosion, and you'll see it going off about 3 different times from 3 different angles. And he was technically doing this in 1902.
Yeah, because if we're spending all this money, you want to see it from every angle, every possible angle, don't we?
With lots and lots of dubs.
Yeah.
And so you've got these moments, and obviously he's using these great kind of special effects that for the time and kind of almost, it's not, he called it, I think, stop motion, although it's not stop motion. We know it. You literally stop the motion of the camera and then you start it again. But these going on from Trip to the Moon, kind of these adventure stories would continue on these voyage journeys. You get the Possible Journey, which is almost like a longer version of it. There's a bit where they get on a magical train and the train goes into the sun eats the train. And then you get Conquest of the Pole in 1912, which again is a longer version. Then there's parts where it's pretty much exactly the same thing, cut half of it down, admittedly. But one of the things that Melies gets kind of criticized for is that it's all on the one plane. And yet there is a part of it where the plane, they've taken a plane to the North Pole at one point, and they fight off a massive giant inflatable monster because you need a boss at the end of your level. But he does it initially by having the plane come kind of over very slowly towards the camera. So you do have these aspects of deep focus in there. Again, this is one of the other points that Ezra points out in the book. A lot of people think Melies is just completely on the flat. Most of the time it was, but he was experimenting with these bits. And in there's one film, Le Carte Vivante, the living playing cards. Melies at one point, he essentially takes a playing card and he makes it a big one on a screen, and then it comes to life and then it vanishes again. But right at the start, he takes a playing card and goes, "You can't see it," and walks very slightly towards the camera to show it to you. And this is the nearest you get to a close-up that you've got here. But the trouble is, as he's going through, and he had an empire at this point, a massive empire. He'd got branches that his brother was running in the States, and there's one in London. He was having to, at one point, shoot with 2 cameras and immediately file one for copyright in the States because everyone was just taking these films, chopping bits off and redoing them and going, "Oh, look, it's a new film." And essentially, Melies was hardly getting any of the money for it. Edison was running a load of, conglomerates of stuff. Pathé was able to churn stuff out. So Melies was kind of coming under fire. And then a lot of people like Edwin Porter and Edison to a certain point, and D.W. Griffith started filming on location. And there are 1 or 2 times when Melies does slightly film on location. I can't remember which film it is. I think it is. I can't remember which one it is. I'll double check at some point. But when they return home, one of the adventure films where they kind of have they go out of a building to get in their ship to fly away somewhere, and it looks like it's shot outside of the studio. So there are parts where he comes in and out of the studio. It's just very rare because most of the time that the camera is mounted, this is just the way he works. And by 1912, unfortunately, his stuff's he's almost being kind of outdated. Everyone else has moved on and he's still in this area. So he starts to get into a load of financial difficulty. And the tragic thing is he manages to get into the war and he survives the war into the 20s and 30s. But in 1917, for the war effort, the army sees 150, 200 of his films and melt because they need the film material and the chemicals in it, melt it down to create boots for the army. The irony that his dad's company made boots and shoes, and a load of his films, a good sort of third or so of his films, are lost forever to make shoes is terrifying to the extreme. But then in the 20s he gets into model making, I think it is, and he's kind of left films behind him. And in the 20s, late 20s, there is a showing of some of his early films in Paris, and he starts to get a bit of recognition again. And in the 30s, a couple of years before he dies, he has some kind of medal presented to him some French medal. And the thing that I love the most is that it's presented to him by one of the Lumiere brothers. So he finally gets a little bit of recognition, although not as much as he should have done probably, and then passes away in the late 30s. So really, his most stuff is the early 80s into late 1800s into the early 1900s, and The Trip to the Moon is what he's most known for. But there's lots of other stuff which is starting to be experimented with. Unfortunately, it's just others that took it, and he was so caught up in his kind of, his stage and his theatre, and he was running these films at the Robert Houdin, that everyone else just kind of outdeveloped him, and he was outdated in 10 years.
And he was forever the showman, wasn't he? I mean, going from that stage magician kind of background, he was always front and center, and eventually, just running the show, giving the audience the most fantastic things to see, and just looking to kind of dazzle them, I suppose, kind of show something wonderful.
And I mean, the 20s is when he built the automaton and showed some kids his reels.
If you're Martin Scorsese, then yes, this is what happens. Although I think it's based off a comic, wasn't it? Hugo was originally a comic or graphic novel that Scorsese adapted. But yeah, even that. So there's things like the train pulling into the station in Hugo, which is kind of an homage both to a train arriving at the station to the Lumiere brothers, and I think there's one or two shots on top of the train as well, which again is the Lumiere, the Melies film as well. So it's interesting to find out that yes, he did Trip to the Moon, but a lot of the stuff is kind of, he was playing around with the stuff, and again with the fish tank when the ship kind of crashes back down to Earth. It splashes into water that he'd shot beforehand, and that is just general water anyway, and they add some stuff to it. And then if it actually hitting the bottom of the sea, he shot that in front of the fish tank. And people say he couldn't edit, but even there's sort of 4 shots or so within 10 seconds that kind of connect up. So he wasn't, yes, there's a lot of stuff that was kind of on screen for about, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but he was playing around and stuff. It's just the speed of everyone else that kind of made him obsolete as they went past. But he's an important figure because he was doing pretty much everything. He made about 500 films in his time of about, under 20 years? A ridiculous amount. And he was doing everything. He wrote the films, he designed most of the sets, he acted in it, he directed them, he ran the production, the companies and everything. He was completely out there, front and center, doing it, control all himself. And again, if nothing else, he's given us that image of the rocket in the eye of the moon, which I think most people in the world recognize without recognizing where they know it from.
Yeah. Even if you haven't seen Trip to the Moon, you've kind of seen Trip to the Moon, haven't you? Because it's just
somewhere in passing.
Pervasive in popular culture now.
Even appearing in Babylon,
as
well, right at the end of that montage.
So, Kieran, what do you think the bottom line of Melies is, and how do you think people should what should people watch from him? I guess if they watch anything on YouTube.
I think A Trip to the Moon is the one you go for. That is the one that he's known for. That's where his legacy will forever be, and it's a fantastic film. I put it on for the Film Magazine in my 10 best films of all time list, and I still think it is. It's just a wonderful piece of kind of early escapism. It's one of the first science fiction films, and as Ezra argues, also kind of one of the first spoofs as well. He invents the sci-fi film and the sci-fi spoof at the same time. How very postmodern. But realistically, that's where you start off. A lot of his early stuff are kind of just like magicians in front of the camera, even stuff like The Haunted Castle from 1896, which is argued the first horror film ever, although it's not really a horror film. It just happens to have devils and demons dancing around and bats and stuff. But I think A Trip to the Moon is where you start, and then if you can put up with that, you'll like pretty much everything else. One of the things I forgot to mention is that he filmed a fake coronation for King Edward VII, as commissioned by Edward VII. They asked him to make his own film, and apparently one of the things Edward VII asked for, or his appointee people asked on behalf of him, was that to make sure that the height of whoever they got to play the king was slightly taller than the Queen, because he's very paranoid about this. So the actor had to be bigger, and apparently Edward eventually saw it and goes, it was absolutely amazing. And apparently, in the timing of the actual coronation, they had to cut some of the ceremony out. But they're like, it's great, there's bits in here that didn't even happen before. It's amazing. It didn't happen in real life, but here it is forever. It's like the real thing, and it literally is just like a stage play that is shot completely flat. There's no cuts, there's no edits. But yeah, a guy who gets paid to essentially fake a coronation by the royal family of a different country, I think is somebody that's worth remembering. Is literally kind of the Stanley Kubrick kind of conspiracy theorist that actually did the equivalent of.
It's the Netflix Harry and Meghan of its day. So, Kieran, thank you for George Méliès, the early silent cinema. Sam, I never heard of Mabel Normand before you brought her up as a topic. So, who is Mabel Normand?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of my question. Why have so few people heard of Mabel Normand? Everyone's heard of Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy. All these people from the same era came up at the same time as Mabel Normand, and many of them worked with Mabel Normand, quite regularly. But she seems to have fallen off the map in the way that all these guys basically haven't. So she's born Amabel Ethelred Normand. What a name, eh? More people should have Ethelred as their middle name.
It's gonna make a
Is it
comeback.
Ethelred or Ethelreed?
Okay, it's Ethelred.
Oh.
There's an I in there. Sorry.
Yeah,
No.
I know, but Ethelred is cool. I don't. Yeah, say it quick enough. It sounds like she was.
Let's add it to the legend, the things people propagate that are wrong.
Yeah,
It'll be our contribution.
Yeah, so Mabel Normand, she was born in 1893 in Staten Island, and after making a start as basically a bit player at New York's Vitagraph Studios, so it's one of the earliest small studios. She well, once she saw her own potential as a star, but she was also kind of discovered when she gave a memorable performance in a short film by, wouldn't you know it, D.W. Griffiths. So she's spotted with
that's a big time movie then.
Yeah. But yes, so she was spotted there, and she met future partner and frequent creative collaborator Max Sennett, who was a director and actor, and they both moved out to LA, to join the movie industry proper, and he ended up founding Keystone Studios. Which was most famous for the Keystone Cops. Did a load of short comedy films around. This gang of inept policemen, basically. Just bumbling everything up and causing chaos. But very often he had Mabel Normand as like the main attraction in the film. She was often the star name, above the title, and she became a big draw at the time. She made 151 films. Between 1910 and 1927. Most of these are shorts, but she did 5 features as well. Unfortunately, around half of these have been lost at time. The surviving films, you can pretty much see them all on YouTube in hugely varying quality. I mean, you might have to search for those few times and try out a few, and yeah, some of them look all right, but a lot of them haven't been looked after very well. So they're, I mean, I do wonder kind of how long we're going to have to wait for someone to give her films like the care and attention that say Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin have had, in terms of like restorations and preservations, because all these kind of early celluloid films, they're just rotting, aren't they? And they're just continuously like copied and it's sad just to see how much these this early films were losing.
Well, in the early days, the idea of saving films wasn't kind of thought of. Like it just wasn't a thing.
I know, yeah, literally, they just just get people in the doors and keep them amused, for a little bit of their afternoon, watch, and it's just, I mean, yeah, it was a very rare thing that like it's unlike the particularly kind of notable ones were kind of kept in circulation for years. A lot of them, were just seen a few times and never seen again.
Again, a lot of them were lost,
Yeah,
passing,
melted down by the military.
Melted down by the military.
Yeah,
Nosferatu only survived because of piracy.
Yeah, I mean, Mabel Normand, she was, she was up in a lot of ways. She was up there with someone like Chaplin, because she wasn't just a star and a comedian, and a great physical performer, but she was a writer and director as well. She directs a fair few of her own like short films. Even directed, Chaplin co-starred with her in a few of them. And you kind of have to wonder, kind of, would she have kind of continued to direct and star in movies and kind of have like that kind of escalation of like her fame and her star power in the same way that Chaplin and Keaton did. If she had lived like for longer. I mean, her star started to wane in kind of like the mid-20s, and she sadly, a combination of involving a couple of personal scandals and some health problems. She ends up kind of losing her audience, and then sadly died at the age of 36 in 1930. So.
It is, and isn't it? It is weird that there are quite a few of these kind of early film stars that died in the 30s. Most of them female. They're kind of very young, sort of 30s and 40s. That kind of almost. It's almost like kind of the transition to sound started some kind of like several year clock, and then after in the 30s, suddenly they're gone.
And there's almost this like character assassination that went on with her because from being like one of America's sweethearts, being one of the most popular actresses out there, for a good 5-year stretch at least. She was she came up around the same time as Fatty Arbuckle. A lot of their early films are together. They normally plays couples. They're all very, very good. Their shorts, normally a bit bickering married couple, and they're both like very successful. And Fatty was at that time the biggest kind of comic star around there. And this was before Chaplin and Keaton had really kind of rose to the height of their fame. He was like predated by a few years, and he was one of the highest paid kind of comedy actors, of that time. And obviously he had the because of her association with him, because she seemed so close to him and kind of acted with him in so many projects. When the scandal with him broke, so obviously it's a very widely publicized trial, for manslaughter in the early 20s. So you had a young woman basically died under suspicious circumstances in his hotel room. At a party in his hotel room. She died sometime during the night, and he was tried. People kind of alleged rape and he'd kind of misused his power and basically just pinned her down, and all kinds of nasty things. He was acquitted, but his reputation kind of never kind of really recovered, and it tainted basically everyone who kind of worked with him for a long time. Unfortunately for Mabel, that wasn't the only scandal she was involved with. She was close friends with another director, William Desmond Taylor, and he was alleged to have been deeply in love with her, something she didn't reciprocate. But he died on suspicious circumstances. Apparently, he was killed by a contract killer, and because I think he got into a lot of debt due to his heavy cocaine use. So someone
this is starting to sound like. It's starting to sound like she's hanging around with the drummers from Spinal Tap.
So someone knocked him off, for his debts, probably killed by gangsters or something. And
Sam,
she was.
I read about that's what's discussed about her in the book Hollywood Babylon. She's why is she not remembered? Well, in media, she's portrayed as a side note in these like really dark stories about dudes.
I know. Yeah, I suppose she has somewhat overshadows, isn't she?
And also Paramount went and scrubbed the crime scene and like took a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this was the era where basically not to put too fine a point on it. Heads of studios were gangsters. They had like private armies, these fixers running around Hollywood and making sure these scandals didn't leak out, or if they did have to leak out, they leaked out in the least damaging time, or right next to another scandal that would overshadow it.
Yeah, you can't really dust for vomit, can you?
No. And then in 1924, so this was again kind of this was after she'd left Keystone at this point, and she'd had some time under her own studio. Actually, she found her own kind of small film company, to get some of the more personal projects that she could have more creative control with kind of made. But at this point, her chauffeur shot and wounded a millionaire oil broker, and I don't think she was in the car at the time, but it was something he was doing kind of on the night where he wasn't driving her around. And again, she was sort of brought to that basically kind of did you know anything about this? Did he ever talk out what he was going to do? And it was basically again, she was a bit overshadowed by something one of her employees ended up doing. But so I particularly want to talk about three films from like three of her 5 feature films, kind of from 3 different eras, kind of her career. A couple of side things. She is credited. Nice bit of true. She is credited as being the first woman to have a pie thrown in her face on film.
That's exciting.
That's a record.
That old silent comedy kind of standby, and this was a Max Sennett, head of Keystone Studios, a Max Sennett kind of trademark.
That would be a fun tweet today.
Yeah. So it was a routine that he loved to put in like a lot of his films that made under studios. Many of them he directed. So the first pie thrown was again a Mabel Normand and Fatih Arbuckle film, a Noise from the Deep, and Sennett himself apparently had a personal rule about who received the pies. A mother never gets hit with a custard pie. Mothers-in-law, yes, but mothers never. And she was also co-starred, which wasn't the lead in this one, but she co-starred in what is definitively the world's first comedy feature film, Tilly's Punctured Romance from 1913, I want to say. Hang on a sec. No, sorry, 1914. And even though she's not the lead in that one, she's she does have a certain quality, like an instant kind of this kind of charisma, and your eye is drawn to her. Even if in that she co-stars Charlie Chaplin and Marie Dressler. They're the leads in that, and she comes in about halfway through, and she's kind of plays second fiddle to them. But even in those, she draws your attention. She kind of just her facial expression. She had a great kind of like, great kind of knowing smile, and kind of some of her reactions to the situations going on around her kind of makes it really. And she was just as good at like taking like a convincing, expertly timed pratfall as like her male contemporaries, and she was really just adept at doing some of the dangerous stunts that they did as well. Think of like Harold Lloyd hanging off the clock tower, or but Buster Keaton, the house falling on him. But she's in Mickey, which is one of her biggest films. She jumps from a height, lands on the back of a horse, and then does like a big scene where she's basically in like a race. Disguised as a jockey. Towards the end of that film, she's hanging off the side of like the tower of a mansion. Seemingly like no support below, or nothing visual. She's probably a net below, I suppose. But she's literally just holding her weight, hanging off the edge of this building. And yeah, she kind of more than kind of held her own, with like kind of a co-stars, become more famous than her, against Charlie Chaplin and Fatih Arbuckle and whoever else she starred with. She always kind of lit up the screen. And it is kind of tragic to an unfair to an extent that she is that Chaplin is so much better known than her. I mean, obviously, he had decades more of a career, and his time directing, and obviously considered like up there with the greatest directors of all time now. But she played a key role in kind of starting his career up. She was. She not only kind of acts opposite him, again usually playing kind of his leading lady, when he was the lead, but she directed and co-directed a few films with him. When he first arrived in Hollywood, he had difficulty adjusting to the demands of film acting, as opposed to like, vaudeville. It took some adjustment, took some time to kind of adjust to kind of how to modulate his performance, for the camera. And even after he'd like debuted like the tramp character, some of the studio execs were kind of, they had their doubts, and they were, I think, this close to kind of letting him go, but she kind of convinced them to give him another chance. And it was almost in combination with her, their dynamic together, that kind of convinced them, saying, oh, maybe there is more to this guy. So like I say, it is kind of sad in a lot of ways, she isn't better known. Like the feature, I think the only feature film she did with Keystone Studios is, as I mentioned, Tilly's Punctured Romance. So she wasn't the lead, but as I said, it was the first comedy feature film, and it was a star vehicle for Mary Dressler, who was a stage actor, and it was based on her play, which she made like a smash hit on Broadway. And she plays like an unrefined kind of country girl who a womanizer played by Charlie Chaplin elopes with in an attempt to steal her father's money. And then when he returns back to the city, he reconnects with an old girlfriend who's played by Mabel Normand, and they both kind of work together to swindle Tilly out of her money, which increase kind of exponentially when she inherits an even larger fortune from her uncle. So it's basically a farce, really. It's kind of like these two kind of crooks trying to manipulate this kind of unrefined woman, and kind of increase in more elaborate ways. Like towards the end, the kind of the Chaplin and Mary Dressler, that Tilly and Charlie, as they're known in the film, they've got to step out and kind of introduce themselves to society. They've inherited this massive mansion, and they just make an absolute meal of impressing like the upper crust, basically. And Mabel's disguised herself as a maid, and she sneaks into the party, and she's trying to kind of manipulate the situation to her advantage, and getting her increasingly more drunk on the punch that she's meant to be serving up to the guests. And towards the end, the Keystone cops turn up, because of course it's a Keystone Studios film, and basically chase these three around like on the end of a pier. They all end up in the water, and they attempt to get Tilly out of the water about 3 times. That great rule of 3 of comedy. She drops it back in the water 3 times. When the rope kind of gives way. And in the end, it kind of, they work out, Tilly and Mabel's character realise they don't need Charlie. He's a bit of a scumbag, really, and we're probably better off just ditching him and walk off the sunset being friends. So nice little ending there. So I'd say that's a nice that's a good one to kind of introduce yourself to. Though she's not like the main draw of the film, she is a big presence in it, and I think the film kind of works as well as it does, kind of with her personality in contrast to Charlie Chaplin and Maria Dressler's. Now, the biggest film was Mickey, which was released in 1918, and this was under her own company, the Mabel Normand Feature Film Company. And this was a star vehicle, funnily enough, for that she got off the ground for herself to kind of be the main draw, and she wanted like a thing where she was the focus. She had a good meaty role to get stuck into, and plenty of opportunities to kind of show off her varied talents. So in this, she plays the title character. She's Mickey, an orphan's kind of impoverished tomboy who's adopted by some rich relatives because they think she's going to inherit some really valuable kind of mineral rights. She grew up in like mining country, basically. and they want to get in on that basically, and they're on the verge of kicking her out because turns out she's like an uncouth kind of yokel who doesn't know how to behave in polite society. And she probably isn't going to be rich. We were mistakes about that. Mistakes about that. But then, oh, wouldn't you know? It turns out the mineral rights do go to her, and now she's a millionaire. So they bring her back, and
There's so many like modern comedies that have that feel and
I
kind of
know.
story to
I
them.
mean, basically, all three of the films I'm talking about, and this goes for a lot of films, comedy films in particular this period, it comes back down to poor people trying to screw over rich people in a variety of duplicitous kind of ways. There's
Pretty
lots
much
of
just Parasite.
yeah, there's lots of like inheritance scandals and people marrying for money and kind of misleading people and just lots of like scams and things.
We could
Um,
trace the evolution from that
yeah,
movie
yeah.
to from Melies first, I'm sure.
Yeah, but like
I'm
over the
sure there's
course of
something
like
related,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, above the course, it's probably like the most convoluted of the three films. There's kind of various kind of double crossings and kind of people have their own agendas and kind of back and forth and stuff. There's a love triangle, of course. There's various misunderstandings and ruses put on, and a couple of great stunts from Mabel, as mentioned earlier. The stuff with the horses and dang off Tara at the end. She dang off Tara at the end because the less savoury corner of this love triangle tries to rape her. Basically, it's like there's an extensive sequence of her being chased around a mansion. He's very very clear what he's wanting, and she's trying to escape. And her true beloved does rescue her in the end, and she inherits her fortune. They ride off into the sunset together. So happy ending.
Sam, I do have a fun one like that.
Yeah,
Heartbreakers.
yeah.
Sigourney Weaver, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Gene Hackman. Hilarious
Okay.
movie.
But Mickey was a real kind of hit with audiences. It really captured kind of people's hearts. And funny enough, it wasn't like an immediate success. There were some issues with the initial release. I should need to double check here. Yes, there was a delay in its widespread release, so it wasn't shown wider for more than a year. So there were some early showings that didn't go down particularly well, and the studio basically lost a bit of faith in it, and distributors weren't that interested in putting it out there. But kind of Max Sennett kind of had obviously new Mel from the Keystone kind of days, kind of had more faith in it, and he kind of shopped it around a bit, and in the end, kind of like a mass kind of publicity campaign kind of got a bit more attention, and they started kind of showing it in small theaters, and they gradually rolled it out, and basically it just kept going, through word of mouth, and in the end, I think it ended up running for a couple of years, and it ended up being the biggest grossing film of 1918. So it was
Apparently the gross wasn't surpassed until Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is two
yeah,
decades,
yeah,
like
yeah,
2 decades later.
yeah, yeah. So actually, worldwide gross of 8 million made on a budget of 250,000. And it was re-released up through 1921 as well. So it was so it kind of captured kind of captured audiences' hearts, and I think people. It was repeat viewings. I think that did it. It was kind of thing people loved it, and they kept going back time and time again, for several years. And it kind of, I think it proved kind of Mabel Normand's kind of real kind of appeal as a star. She kind of, I suppose, a bit like Chaplin to an extent, or Buster Keaton. She was kind of like an every woman, kind of very relatable to people. But this kind of showed a range. There are dramatic moments. I think Mickey is put through the ringer a bit. She does gets played a few melancholy notes, and there's quite a lot of pathos to kind of her story. Being an orphan, and kind of a harder life, and they're basically being messed around by like the upper classes. Kind of think like she's got some stability one moment, and then she's out, out on the street again the next, and messed around by obviously all the men she meets in her life as well. And kind of following this, she kind of she was still doing like regular kind of short films and working with other kind of kind of famous comedy talent, but starts to wane a little bit, and then obviously had the scandals following this. But she had one last big hit like before the end, and that was when she moved to Hal Roach Studios, which are obviously famous for being the studio that gave home to Laurel and Hardy. And the final film I was going to mention is Raggedy Rose from 1926, which was co-written by Stan Laurel, and it has got a fair amount of Laurel and Hardy-esque kind of humour to it, I think. So Normand plays in this. She plays Rose, and she's like an impoverished woman, works in a junk shop for pittance, and loses that job, and basically is on the streets and starving, and she just wants a good meal. Basically, again, it's another bit of like a bit of a kind of it's a tragic comedy, I'd say. There are a fair amount of kind of fairly difficult kind of scenes, some bizarre scenes as well. I mean, there's a scene where she's kind of got a partner in crime. He's almost like a Fagin kind of figure who kind of runs this junk shop and kind of sends like these kind of desperate people out, on missions for him, to steal valuable goods that he can sell on. I've seen earlier on where they're trying to get some stuff out of this rich doctor's house, and to distract him, there's some noisy cats in the neighborhood, but they've rigged up these weird kind of cat puppets, and they kind of crouch behind a wall and kind of like puppeteering them on the wall, making cat noises. The guy keeps kind of doing double takes and seeing these weirdly moving cats on. Kind of,
Cats 2019.
Yeah,
as done by
Georges
Méliès.
Yeah, and he sends his butler out. Butler played by James Finlayson, who's famous for being the foil to a lot of Laurel and Hardy films. This thin Scottish guy, this great bushy moustache. He's got one of the great kind of double take faces in history, in movie history. So basically, Mabel as Roche, she's desperate. She just wants a good meal, and then she hears kind of this story that, well, if you get sent to hospital, if you're seriously injured, they'll give you a few good meals a day, and they'll feed you up, and you'll be comfortable for a while. So she tries to get herself run over. she runs out into the road and tries to get a car to hit her, and after a few kind of weave around. There's a great gag where this woman driving the car up to her, screeches to a halt just before it hits her, and then the car collapses. It kind of just falls apart right in front of her.
I was going to say, it doesn't do a Buster Keaton bit where he runs out in the middle and then two headlights come towards him. It's two bikes.
No, but that is a great gag though. But yes, this car collapses. She can't really pull it off. So in the end, she finds an ambulance and then collapses under it and pretends like she's hit it. And she thinks, "Oh yeah, great, finally I can get to hospital." So put her in a stretcher, put her in the back. But the ambulance drives off a bit too fast, and the stretcher shoots out the back, and so she's left on the side of the road. In the end, she manages to make it to the house of this kindly rich doctor. Fun enough, the same guy who they were trying to fleece earlier on in the film, who kind of takes pity on her, takes her in, puts her in his bed, and then just kind of gives her a quick check over, and he's gonna help her. He's gonna kind of bring her up to back to full strength. All the while, his housekeeper, his fiance, and her kind of mother, they're all trying to plot against space because they see straight through her. The mother-in-law wants the daughter to marry this rich doctor, and they don't want this homeless woman to get in the way and spoil their plans. So it's like a series of skits basically where they're trying to first off, trying to prove that she's she's faking, and then basically they're trying to get her out of the way. Basically, so there's lots of kind of wrestling around and squabbling in the bedroom. And there's a bit with a lot of ice cubes in a bath. Of course, they're trying to throw her into, but she managed to push the fiance in the bath instead. Towards the end, both mother-in-law and the fiance ends up taking a headfirst dive out of the bedroom window into the roof of the doctor's waiting car. And yeah, it's all. I think he in the end he's just a good guy. He just wants to help her out. So they have a pretty kind of a pretty happy ending in the end.
She sounds like such an incredible physical performer. Like you're really
Yeah,
selling me to go
yeah,
watch at
yeah,
least clips.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will recommend there is a YouTube account called Mabel Normand. So it's got most of her shorts on there.
Sam,
And a few of the
you
features
cut out a little bit. Will you re-say that?
There is a YouTube account that's just called Mabel Normand. So I would recommend you check that out. It's got all the shorts on there, and most of her features as well. I think again of kind of varying quality, but that's a good place to start. You can just work your way through them. Literally, they call like Mabel Normand film number 26. So it's like they numbered chronologically throughout her career. And there's a couple of compilations on there and a couple of video essays as well, like her greatest hits and kind of what made her kind of special and stuff. And I think Empire magazine did a good kind of retrospective feature on her. They do like a deep dive feature, like into like particular moments of like classic film history, and they did a good kind of overview of like her career and kind of what happened to her and why. But I think she was kind of a unique presence, and I think kind of being, I mean, obviously there were women directors, of that time, some quite successful ones, but they're not necessarily household names today. And particularly for someone like Mabel Normand to, starring in these films and often directing and kind of, if not writing and providing them with concepts, for the main kind of set pieces, and just having this kind of creative mind and kind of this need to perform and this this aptitude for it, kind of makes it pretty special in my mind. So I think she kind of deserves to be up there and kind of more appreciated, for the kind of performer she was.
She started at a fairly young age as well.
Yeah.
She's born 1893, and according to Wiki, her first film was in 1910, so she'd been 17 at the time. And she'd done loads when she's 17, 18, 19. So,
yeah. I mean, another thing that's interesting about it is kind of that the classic move for kind of comedy stars that era was vaudeville, and then to the screen, but she didn't really have like that same kind of background. I think she just from moving away from home, I think she just went straight to the movies. Really, that's what she wanted to do, So to kind of engineer that kind of that aptitude for it, and getting that experience from the start. I mean, whereas Chaplin needs a bit of time to relearn the ropes and kind of learn the new demands of cinema, she kind of saw that from the start, and kind of took to it, like a duck to water.
Wow.
Indeed.
And so that's the kind of middle of the silent era, almost going towards the end, and then right at the end, when they're trying to find ways to shake it up a bit, somebody decides, you know what we need? We need a movie that's 5.5 hours long. We're going to show it on 3 different screens in 3 different colors at the same time.
Oh, yeah. So I love the 1920s, like artistic film directors, theorists. They are my favorite. Like, because I love their philosophy. I love their view of film. Yeah. Because even in the, 40s, 50s, film was not quite seen as an art form in the same way as painting or theater or, thespianism, going back to the Greeks, the very classical view of what is art, what is culture, all of that. So Abel Gance was born in, let's see what I write here, 1889 in Paris, and he died in 1981, I'm pretty sure also in Paris. And he obviously started in the silent era. He began as an actor, but as they transitioned to sound and, in the U.S., the studio system, he was struggling to get money. Nobody really wanted to watch stuff that he was making. And so he did release Napoleon a couple of times throughout like the 60s and 70s. And he was alive to see Kevin Brownlow's 5-hour cut in 1979 of Napoleon. And that's the version I watched, I think was first screened in 1980, the full 5.5. The triptych is available natively within the movie, so I vainly spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that work on 3 different screens. I didn't
Did
need
you
to.
work it out?
It did. Although each individual screen is available on the BFI DVD, so if you want to get a hold of that, it is a Region 2 disc because Francis Ford Coppola owns the rights, and it was released on VHS. There may be digital copies floating around in the atmosphere of the internet. You know, who knows? But yeah, it's really tough to find this movie if you're not, or if you're in the U.S. His big movies, J'accuse in 1919, that was an anti-war film about World War I. He re-released it or remade it during like the 30s for World War II to kind of give the same pacifist view.
More proof that remakes have always been a thing.
Yes, exactly. But he did it as like an artistic statement. He wasn't just. I mean, look, that's the way he sold it. His film LaRue in 1923, Jean Cocteau said of it, "There's the cinema before and after LaRue, as there is painting before and after Picasso." Abel Gance in his time was viewed as a visionary, and in France at the time, the Impressionist, movement was happening in film. And there's just a lot of subjectivity to the way the camera works, the shots are, the things that are happening within the film, in order to give people the impression of a character's mindset, psychology, through the visuals.
I was going to say, you've got Unported and Napoleon coming out, 1920, so a couple of years earlier, which is still regarded many people as the greatest short film ever made.
It's
which
awesome.
Is very much. It's Louis Buñuel teaming up with Salvador Dali to have 20 minutes of madness, including slitting somebody's eye. Yeah, it's weird, and insects coming out of somebody's hand. It was a weird time.
Yeah, and it employs a lot of like the cool.
Yeah.
Oh, Sam, what's up?
No, I was going to say it was 1929 on Chien Andalou. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's
I thought it was 1919.
No, it's 29.
But still, around the same time.
Yeah,
I didn't have
definitely.
to say my wrong answer.
This is how much we know on the podcast when we're meant to be experts.
Well, hey, I didn't read about surrealism, all right? I read about Impressionism. And that's the school Gance sort of came out of. And, of course, that was a movement in painting in France as well. And so they sort of adapted that to film. I think, what's his name? David Bordwell wrote his dissertation on French Impressionism.
Of course he did.
It's I've scrolled through it, but at some point I would like to read it because if anyone's not done any kind of film studies, will not know who David Bordwell is. Anybody that has done any kind of film studies will have heard of David Bordwell in passing, and anyone that's thinking about doing it, you will get to David Bordwell at some point in some lecture somewhere. He's just one of those ones that you have to name check at some point. If you're interested in film style, he's got a really good book on that. It's like a textbook, but it's very thorough. And so out of that impressionist movement, or while that's happening, in France, over in Russia, they're making montage theory and Eisenstein and that chess movie I talked about. They're using contrasting images, the conflict between them, for meaning to come out, because it's Soviet Russia.
Comes out in 24.
Yeah. Eisenstein wrote a whole book on montage. It's awesome. And there's also an aspect to it that's like adding two cells together to equal the third one. And so Gance is sort of independently developing that stuff within his film. And so Napoleon becomes his, I wish I knew the French word for masterpiece, but if he began to be perceived as an auteur, in the traditional understanding of that, it's Napoleon that is his, this is his defining film. Sam, you were talking about before the show, it's tough to describe the story, and it is. So the way that,
I mean, if you're being particularly dismissive. You could just say, read a book, find out who Napoleon was.
Yeah, or go watch the Ridley Scott film and then read the
Yeah.
articles about what's wrong in it.
What's wrong with it? Yeah.
So he developed Napoleon. He was allowed to go into the Palais Fontainebleau, or whatever it's called, where Napoleon reigned as emperor. He was in Napoleon's place writing this novel-length script, and it was the first of 6 films to cover Napoleon's life. So he only made 2/3 of the first movie, but ultimately he gives a satisfying conclusion to the story of Napoleon. As the actual title, it is Napoleon vu par Abel Gance, and so in English it's understood as Napoleon seen by or seen through Abel Gance, which is how I'm going to say it because I'm not French. So yeah, this one ends in 1796 with the Italy campaign, and at the end it is a giant, formalist, experimental, awesome part that creates a symbolic conclusion, but is not really a satisfying narrative ending. It's split into 4 acts. They shot 400,000 meters of celluloid to make this. So, also in this era, there are people still alive that their parents were involved with this. There was a guy on Corsica whose grandfather helped Napoleon escape, and now he's in this Napoleon movie. There's so many cool connections to the French social consciousness, too, that I don't understand and didn't do a lot of reading about. The way I watched it on the disc was I had the commentary running, and, oh gosh, I forget the guy's name. I should know this. I'm not going to find it, but I'll figure it out later. He's an English scholar, and he has a full 5.5-hour commentary track. And it's really interesting historically, really informative cinematically. And so I was listening to the music in the background because there was a full brand new composing by Carl Davis. And there's extras and bits you can read about what he did with that. This restoration process is awesome. And, what you really get out of that, I think, is the significance of parts of things cinematically. And, yeah, there's a lot of history stuff, but there's a lot of wrong history stuff in this, too. So Gance put in these things. They'll say history to indicate that the quote is historically accurate, but he was using a source that was debunked in the 1830s. He's making Babylon based on Hollywood Babylon. So the film is divided into 4 acts, and the 5.5 hours of footage are pretty much all that remain. Act 1 is, I would say, you can watch that if you want to watch a silent film. It's nearly 2 hours long. It has a satisfying conclusion. It starts with Napoleon as a kid, and there are some really cool moments in that with multiple exposures, superimposition. There's 16 going at once, and it really gets across Napoleon's crazy mindset, his strategizing, all of that sort of stuff. I think the kid portion is great too. If you only want to watch that and then watch the end, that's another good way to watch it. I can think of a million ways to edit this movie and make it perhaps more palatable.
Apparently, the commentary is delivered by Paul Cuff.
Thank you.
Who I've never heard of, but I just thought I'd look it up.
Doesn't ring any bells for me either, so it shows how good we are.
Yes, and he wrote the intro too in the booklet that comes with it. And so Act 1, it's childhood. Him going, he's poor, and part of that's cut out. He goes back home to Corsica. We get to see, his family. They're filming at his house. They show the sign that was on there that was this is Napoleon's house, and the ivy grows over it in a shot. And throughout this first act too, he's using chest-mounted cameras that are being hand-cranked by somebody. He came up with so many innovative ways to shoot all of this ridiculous stuff, like a camera swooping down over the audience. He used matte paintings to make extra giant sets. It's Melies illusion work through his set design and effects and all that. In the earlier fight scene, he does a 9-square split screen where you had to cover up everything but one square and keep shooting on that film over and over again.
Oh,
Yeah, I was going to say the split screens is interesting because it was around with Melies, just a weird thing on split screen, but he hardly ever used it. But there is one film which is interesting, digging a tunnel through the channel, tunneling the English Channel, about the French and the British going to dig Channel Tunnel in 1907. Bearing in mind it was finished in 1990 something, tells you if it was real. But it starts off with the leaders of France and the UK. I'm not sure if they're kings at the time or prime ministers like that. And they've got a white kind of block, and it's literally a wall separating the two instead of a split screen. But then occasionally there's a door in it, and occasionally they'll move between them and like say hi. So you've got this weird thing of a split screen acting like both to split kind of in space, but also kind of like not time as well, like time but also not at the same time. So it's this really weird idea with split screen, which he kind of played around with, which obviously has been developed over the years and years. And as you're saying now there's 9 little compartments that are being used in Napoleon across 3 different screens. So is there like 3 in each one, or how does that work with the split?
So I think he didn't shoot most of the film in the triptych because it was not economically feasible. So yeah, that part doesn't, but that's how he sort of substitutes. And so the triptych, which, I'll get to how awesome that is, but the triptych is, he began to refer to it as polyvision. Somebody else coined the term. And I can't remember if I read this somewhere or if I heard it in the commentary or just my own thing that I was making up, who knows. But polyvision, it's thought of as the triptych, but it's really a multifaceted term because of Gance. He used polyvision for like the age of the atom. There's a quote that I couldn't find attribution for, but it could be said to be comprised of the triptych, the impressionist montage rapid editing, which there's a ton of just flashing, probably seizure-inducing sequences that the cuts are like physically as fast as you're able to go with in-camera cutting. So all of those different elements of multiplicity of visuals, I would say would qualify as polyvision, especially later on when he gets to, putting multiple spatial and temporal images together. And in Act 2, by the way, on the side, finish Act 1 actually. There's French Revolution stuff going on the side. Robespierre has cool glasses. He looks like Morpheus and like a George Washington wig. It's really cool.
Wow.
I'm not going to dwell much on that part of the plot, though. It's historically important to French people. I'm here to watch Napoleon, and I get he's involved with that, but those are the parts that are boring. Act 2, finishing Act 1 again, because that's the cool part. There's a chase scene from Corsica back to France because he's going to be put under arrest by Corsicans allied with the English, and then the double tempest scene, which is a storm going on that Napoleon's on a little boat, and he's trying to get to France from Corsica, and it's like really cool water effects, and like the actor did not want to be on the sea. And then there's shots of like rushing water that are going to be reused. Act 1 is crazy. You would think that a siege might be a little more exciting, but I think a lot of it's really about demonstrating Napoleon's leadership, his adult demeanor, further as like a military member. And also earlier in the film, there was the symbol of the eagle becomes associated with him, which is big for later on. In Act 2, the cool part of that is when he goes to there's these overgrown cannons in, I guess, Toulon, wherever he is in France. And there's a little kitty that's living inside of the cannon. And so there's all of these different comical, bumbling characters or incompetent characters or moments of cuteness that are contrasted with his, stony leader nature, great man stuff. And obviously there's no fall in this movie. It's foreshadowed visually and through the story. But the movie never got made. So, by the way, Kubrick famously not a fan of this movie. So, I think
I have heard in the last year or so that Spielberg wants to make it as a 7-8 part drama series.
Yes, I hope he does. Because we need the fall done in like a good way. I haven't seen Ridley Scott's yet, but
neither have I.
I know of its reputation in the media. Yeah, and so there's a lot of really good like epic realism to it. There's a lot of big battles, but Act 2 is lower than Act 1 in my ranking, but it is above Act 3, which is the terror. The Reign of Terror is the most boring part.
How does that happen?
So it's about Napoleon. Part of the criticism I've seen of the new Napoleon movie is the romance between Joaquin Phoenix and whoever plays Josephine. Yep, there you go. In this movie, they have chemistry. Like there's nothing wrong with it, but it needs to be cut down. It's very long. There's some cool imagery at the end where he sees her in a globe and he kisses the globe, and the guy thinks he's kissing Paris, but he's kissing Josephine and sort of showing his internal conquering of the world, but also her as an individual. It's a really cool film stuff that he was able to like use superimposition to just make something that nowadays we could probably make ourselves with like green screen or whatever. Yeah, but it looks awesome. And so, yeah, they get married at the end. She has like what is it? An altar to Napoleon, basically. And she has a statue of him. And the statue becomes him in a shadow on the wall. She kisses the shadow, finishing a parallel. There's also a shot where Robespierre has he has a book, and then there's things set up around it that become a guillotine on the book. And then something falls down and makes the guillotine chop. That's awesome. But yeah, Robespierre and Saint-Just are, cool for a second, but it's so, like, I don't know. It's boring. That's really all I can say about it. So, Saint-Just is played by Abel Gance, and he wanted to put in all of this imagery of, like, he has a big speech. There were supposed to be tigers and volcanoes, lava running down to show his fiery passion and aggression, but it didn't happen. Budgetary, I don't know. It's in the script or something, or in his notes.
I can see why Coppola got his hands on this.
I need someone to make that montage.
Can I just ask you, Jake, did you watch this all in one sitting, or did you... How long did it take you to watch it? How many breaks did you take?
I watched it over 4 days. I watched one disc per day, and
I'd probably do the same.
I fast forwarded through Act 3. I learned they had balls. They were called like victims' balls or something. And if your family got killed in the terror, you went to the ball, and it was like a social status thing. Because French people. And rich people.
Consolation prize. Your loved ones died. We get to go to a party.
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure he said it was like a sign of like social status. It was, you wanted to have somebody killed. If it didn't happen, you're a stupid poor. So disc 4, Act 4, whatever you want to call it. One of Gance's favorite portions is at the beginning. Napoleon's, and mine as well. I really like it. Napoleon goes into the convention hall for the rebels, and it's empty. This is where they used a big matte painting to like make a set bigger. Napoleon is tiny. It's a big shot, like super wide angle, far away. It's so cool. And then it cuts in on him, and as the camera turns to shoot the stands, superimposed ghosts of the revolution start to appear, and Abel Gance and Just shows up and says, "Napoleon, you must not forget your duty to the revolution. You are the heir." It's literally like Star Wars. It's awesome, and of course, Napoleon wouldn't do that. He would become emperor, and he would fail in his intention to make a utopian, borderless Europe, because of Brexit.
So
I think
what you're saying is that George Lucas nicked everything from Napoleon.
he nicked everything from everybody. Man does not have an original thought.
This is true, actually, completely true.
Yeah, and so that part's cool because it's also Gance. Gance is literally saying to Napoleon, you know, you have this duty. I'm charging you with that, and sort of representing the French people, the spirit of democracy and republicanism and all that. I don't know.
Now, please be successful for me to make another 5 movies out of you.
Yes. And so, also there's an amber tint on them, blue tint on him. He uses a lot of tint and, I forget the other word, toning, to great effect. And I'm not sure if Browning had to do any of that himself, but it's possible. And the best part of the whole film is the triptych. I love the triptych because I'm watching it on a TV. Like, it's pretty big, but it's not as big as it could be. The Dr. Cuff, or Huff, or whatever it was, he said that he watched it on like a 40-meter screen or something. I don't know if that's big. I don't know how big meters are. But yeah, huge screen. That's the way to see this, apparently. So maybe I would skip 2 of the nights and just go night 1 and night 4. The triptych is sometimes cohesive. So there'll be moments where you're seeing a panoramic shot, and it's with 3 cameras. It's, you know, cut across. You could see the little, like, separations. And he went to a Cinerama showing in the 50s and said they still haven't improved that. And
again, still sounds like Coppola.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like Coppola. So he has those cohesive panoramics, but then he'll have Napoleon's, like, face in the middle and his thoughts and strategies going on the side. It'll be maps of Italy and the royal, like, I don't know, look or seal or something like that. Then on the other side, it's Josephine's face and a globe, and everything is spinning. So we're getting Napoleon's, like, his musings, his thought processes. You know the scene in The Hangover where he's doing the math in his head, and it's all he does that. He does that with Napoleon's, like, battle movements on maps.
The Hangover nicked everything from 1927's Napoleon. Wow.
Yes, down to pratfalls and
Well, we know how much Todd Phillips likes stealing stuff from Scorsese, so, you know, he looks even further back for his earlier film.
So that whole, you know, period of triptych in the film, it takes place in the last, like, 13 to 15 minutes. There's 3 different planes of action, time periods, space. There's a part where, like, the army is marching. We get Napoleon on the sides riding his horse, and we get in the middle, like, poor people walking with their like, farm tools to go fight with Napoleon. And so within Gance's montage theory, it's saying, like, Napoleon is the spirit of the people. You know, he's going out to conquer Italy, and that's good for France. I don't quite understand that aspect of it, but that's how he's using his editing and his revolutionary takes on all of these different styles and ideas that have been developed, is creating that massive impressionistic triptych. The best part of it is the final 5 minutes. That's where it really starts to get ridiculous. The battle scene turns red. let's see, he struts across the triptych. So it's just a gray sky, and he walks across the screens. There's a big panoramic shot where a horse walks through the whole thing, like a live painting. Like it just allows him to create a whole new visual language. Eagle spreads its wings across all 3 screens, which apparently is the best shot when you're watching it live. And finally, shots come back from the beginning of the film: the water, a plume of fire, all the different people, all the different symbols, superimposed, rapid cutting, everything going crazy on 3 different screens. Finally, we get the French flag one where Napoleon's face on either side, and there's all the rapid cutting in the middle. And it ends with the French flag, and there's the water, the shot of the rushing water from the Tempest, that sort of creates a flowing effect to make it a flag. And it's the coolest thing I've ever watched. Yeah.
And on that note,
well, it was screened initially in 2 different versions. One was at the oh gosh, where did I write this down? A 5-hour cut at the Paris Opera was the first showing, and then the definitive cut, the 9.5-hour Apollo Theater showing in Paris. It was shown over a period of days, so I was just watching it in a historically accurate way.
And everybody that does the marathons of Lord of the Rings extended in one sitting, just like amateurs, the lot of it.
Yeah, there's 4 hours of missing footage, and I don't know if Browning has footage that he didn't include just because of low quality, but they just keep finding it in places. I don't think they found any recently, but if they do,
it'll be in someone's attic somewhere.
Hopefully.
No,
Storage Wars.
Under a motorway, like the negatives for the Wicker Man, you know.
And so his legacy, you know, he had a similar thing to Melies, where he faded away, and finally, you know, it was really I think the French New Wave people who sort of began to popularize him and see him as an unrecognized master. Although the film was critically acclaimed at the time, but I think they just wanted to draw more prominence in the French consciousness. Truffaut said, "Napoleon must be discussed as a whole, an unassailable monument." Well, I disagree a little. You can skip parts. It must also, this is essential, be spoken of with humility. What contemporary film, French or foreign, that has been praised unanimously by the press and public, will be shown in 28 years and arouse the applause of a theater filled with filmmakers and critics, as Napoleon did yesterday evening. And talking of one of his later films called Le Tour des Neiges, he says, that movie, if you will, the least good of Abel Gance's films, but since Gance is a genius, it is also a film of genius. Gance does not possess genius, he is possessed by genius. So not only did Gance have a very high mind about his own work and his own art, later, you know, portrayals of him in French media began to give him credence and appreciate that image. And Kevin Brownlow wrote a whole book about Napoleon and is a big silent film, I guess, historian. So go check him out, and also the other guy that Sam said earlier.
I was going to say, listening to that, is there any wonder that auteur theory started in France? Really?
Yeah. I mean, Abel Gance wrote the screenplay, and he's the only person credited. If somebody else helped, they weren't credited. I guess Browning would probably have the answer on that, but if you're going by the classical rules of auteur from Andrew Sarris, Gance is.
And that takes us pretty much to the end of Silent, I think, because that's 1927, and that's the year that The Jazz Singer comes in. Yeah. As we discussed, and the entire universe of cinema pretty much collapses on itself, and about 10% of the performers manage to make the journey over, and the rest essentially fade out to obscurity.
Yeah, all the ones with the weird voices were a bit screwed.
Yep.
And
sink or swim.
anybody that was kind of like a silent star from like, you know, that had a kind of a European accent that now had to be in kind of American or British films. Suddenly the accents were wrong. So you aren't going to make you ain't going to make the switch, are you? So, and we haven't got dubbing yet. So,
Yeah. All right. So, final question: what's your pithy perspective on the silent film era?
Firstly, it wasn't silent. Let's do the whole thing. It wasn't silent. People played along. We've done this before, I think.
Yeah.
Silent cinema wasn't silent. Anyway, somebody else take it first.
Sam.
Well, it's the bricks and mortar of film, isn't it? I think you can't dismiss it, because it's like, what was it, about a fifth of the total time cinema's been around was silence. So
What was
and
it?
I think
1895 to 1927, yeah?
yeah,
So it's 32 years, and
Yeah.
cinema's probably a quarter, actually.
yeah. So it's there's so many innovations of the time, and so many kind of artists trying to work out what this new form of art could be. It's if I think none of us in the modern era can ever look at a silent film the way audiences of the time would have done now. There are just frames of reference, and what we used to are just so different. But
It's like that
you
scene
can,
in 2001 with the
yeah,
monkeys and the
yeah,
relic.
yeah. Or the scene in Barbie with the girls and the dolls.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's
And I've just done the maths. It is exactly one quarter as of 2023.
wow.
Jeez.
So they're fascinating artifacts to us these days, and I think you wouldn't have anything you have today without that kind of era and the innovations they had. I will probably, unless it's a comedy show, I'll probably not watch many of them kind of pleasure, just to unwind, to put on. But if I want to fill some gaps in my knowledge, they're fascinating kind of things to watch. And the more I see that, and I do need to see more of them. I think the more my knowledge of general film history will kind of improve. So yeah, it's a fascinating period, and I think anyone who kind of dismisses it entirely. I mean, some people don't even watch black and white films. Weirdos. Imagine trying to get a teenager these days to watch silent films. Might be a challenge, but just to generalize massively there. But
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think silent and the silent era is now something that kind of you almost have to not necessarily go searching for, but you kind of have to have a reason to go into it, if that makes sense.
It doesn't come to you. It won't appear on like a Netflix
no.
role, will it?
And perhaps the nearest you'll get is
seek it out.
Yeah, and the nearest you'll get is I don't know, you're watching some movie that's set in the 1920s, like Babylon or something like that, where they're all silent performers, and you've got like a reconstruction of around that time. It is very unlikely you're going to scroll through Netflix and find Caligari or something along those lines, unless you're looking for Charlie Chaplin or Laurel Hardy, but that kind of thing. But even then, I think a lot of people now, and I say people now, probably the younger generations than us, which isn't that young, not that old. We'll have seen clips in various things, but not kind of, and therefore we think we've seen it. Like everybody knows Charlie Chaplin, just by almost default of cultural like osmosis, and therefore we feel like we know what silent is. Or we see like random montage clips on various things, and therefore we've seen it, but we actually haven't. And I think it's an interesting place to go and find where everything started. And if you kind of look at the history of film, you have to go into science and you have to understand where it started from, where it's come from, and the amount of stuff that we've got now comes from there, even just still nicking ideas, even like the Shining thing from the Phantom Carriage and the imagery and things like even is it René? It's not René Magritte. Who did the Cinderella? The shadow one with her climbing up the stairs.
I can't remember.
I can't remember who did it. I'll look at it. It was like 1920, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
1920. The name is annoying me, and I'm gonna punch myself once I see it. But
I don't
it's
know what
done,
this movie is.
it's done in complete shadow.
That's dope.
And it was an animated black and white. So you essentially just black cardboard cutouts essentially, and you'd move it around like that, almost expressionist. But there's a very similar shot in Tim Burton's Vincent, the short that he did, replicating walking up the stairs, which is literally lifted directly from that. So Tim Burton's grabbing stuff, Kubrick's grabbing stuff from the silent years. Obviously, Scorsese's going back to their Babylon that we came out last year is all about that. It's constantly there and it's constantly in the back. And I don't think it'll ever go away. And I think the important thing is to do as much as possible to preserve the stuff, because so much of it has already been lost. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose it all. And just for the kind of just a social and cultural thing, to still have the stuff hundreds of like 125, 130 odd years later, and still find it enchanting is an incredible achievement. And if we're not careful, we'll treat it as just silent stuff doesn't really matter. We don't really care about that, and it will just vanish, and we can't have that.
Yeah, I'm all about digital film preservation, like not pirating, but preservation. I'm a big proponent of that. And yeah, I mean, if you're interested in silent movies, go watch acclaimed ones. Go watch ones that people today are like, go watch that. It's worth your time. But if you're not really interested but want to know a little bit, go watch Babylon. That's really the best thing you can do to have fun learning about silent movies, I think.
Or like biopics, like Chaplin. So that's got some interesting kind of little tidbits about his early career, and Mabel Normand is in that, played by Marissa Tomei. I've just remembered.
Lotte Reiniger.
Oh,
1922.
Yeah.
There we go.
I guess just in general,
interesting.
Watch movies about people from the silent era, probably. More modern ones.
Definitely.
And look out for my various edits of Napoleon that I want to make. Yeah. So
are you going to chuck the third disc out the window?
No. Look, I'm going to just go over it with a fine-tooth comb and find like what people would probably want to watch and throw cohesion to the wind.
Like what they're doing to the Star Wars prequels. You're going to do that to Napoleon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and try and do it like artistically with editing, not just slap stuff together. Yeah. So, anyways, that's our first silent film episode. We will be coming back here.
Yeah, we'll be coming back, and we have to make the conscious effort to come back, because otherwise we just won't.
Yeah. We'll discuss.
Yeah. So, but that's going to do it for this chapter and that. But until we're doing something else next week, guys, where can people find you?
You can find me at SSP Thinks Film and at the Film Magazine, where there are a couple of updates to my two Marvel Cinematic Universe lists, and I think there'll be an update to my Ridley Scott list in the next few days once I've seen Napoleon. So check out where that ends up.
And hopefully you don't find me anywhere, but if you do want to somehow track me down, I am K Judgmental across the various places and platforms and out there somewhere. I don't know what new I have up, because I can't remember what was out since last time. But at the very least, I've got my Catherine Bigelow movies ranked up now, Thanksgiving, and a review of the little movie called Embers, which is very independent and looking for some distribution. So if you manage to find that, go see it. It's very good. It's very well done.
And you can find me at Jacob Film Guy. I still have not written anything, but you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm trying to tweet more about the stuff that I watch, even though I, disagree with, the platform. It's kind of
Unfortunately, we've still got to
necessary.
use it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really a viable alternative yet. No.
So social media is a necessary evil in this biz. So
Yes.
I'm going to try and tweet about more stuff. I liked the Hunger Games movie. I thought it was really
Someone
well
has
done.
to.
Yeah. So check it out. Yeah. So that's it. We plugged the merch earlier.
I was going to say, we should replug the merch. Go buy the merch.
Yes.
You know,
in the description.
T-shirts like this.
Life finds a way.
Yeah, and hopefully the Life of the Film magazine will find a way. Yeah, go donate to us. If you don't want to buy merch, just give us money. Although why you do it that way around, I don't know.
We take francs, any denomination.
Yes, 10,000 of them to buy us a new kinematograph would be appreciated.
Yep. And that's it. Right? Is that it? Yeah.
Yep. I think so. 2 hours in. Thanks for sticking with us.
Yes. Thank you for watching.
Very well.
Yes. Bye.